Good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. I am Aaron Bastani. Joining me this evening, Kieran Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
I would say I'm like a walking water feature everywhere I go. I sweat a lot. Sorry, some of our listeners and viewers are probably eating, maybe TMI. But yes, I am struggling in this heat. Otherwise, I'm very happy and glad to be here with you, Aaron. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I think it's lost on people of European heritage that actually people from the Middle East tend to have a browner complexion, obviously. We sweat more, not less. You think, oh, you're adapted to the heat. Yes, think of this like hundreds of thousands of years of adaptation, a kind of biological AC. But it's the kind of AC we like. It doesn't contribute to climate change or CO2 emissions. Coming up tonight, Keir Starmer faces yet more party rebellion over proposed welfare reforms. A Green Party membership has reputedly hit a record high since Zach Polanski's leadership bid. And Israel has bombed a crowded Gaza cafe that's popular with journalists and activists alike. Stay tuned for all of that and more. If you'd like to support our work here at Novara Media, you can, of course, sign up at novaramedia.com/support and make sure to let us know your comments on the YouTube chat or just tweet at us, at me, on the hashtag Novara Live. Before we start tonight's show, a reminder that tickets are now on sale for the next Downstream IRL. That will see Ash Sarkar talking to historian William Dalrymple at Earth Theatre in Hackney on July the 29th. Tickets are available via the link in the description below. He's the GOAT. William Dalrymple is the GOAT when it comes to history, travelogues, particularly in South Asia. I'll be speaking to Joe Quinn on the undercard, how the East made the West. Two great historians, two great people to talk to. Both have previously joined us here on Novara Media on Downstream. Both those interviews did terrifically well. That is going to sell out. If you want to come see William, Ash, Joe Quinn, and myself, like I say, the link to get tickets is in the description below. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing the biggest threat of his political career today. That's as rebellious Labour MPs are set to vote on his government's bid to slash benefits for the disabled and those too ill to work. The welfare bill's second reading debate before the vote is currently taking place in Parliament, and we may even be able to bring you the result as it happens at around 7 p.m. But angry backbenchers have already scored some concessions from the government. Good for some of the worst off in this country, less good for Keir Starmer's grip on power. But for other backbenchers, the government hasn't watered down the bill enough. One of the most powerful speeches from MPs today was delivered by Labour's Marie Tidball.
In March 2020, when the Conservative government looked like an outlier in appearing to pursue a strategy centering on herd immunity, I felt raw, hot fear. Thinking of my toddler and what might happen if I caught coronavirus meant I sobbed deeply. After 10 years of austerity, I knew then that disabled people would pay an enormous price, and they did. Almost 60% of COVID-related deaths were disabled people in that first wave. I vowed then that I would do all I could to create a country which treats disabled people with dignity and respect. The social security system was broken by the Conservative legacy of austerity and their monumental mishandling of the COVID pandemic. I am now one of the only visible physically disabled members of Parliament. I am proud that our manifesto committed to championing the rights of disabled people and the principle of working with disabled people to ensure our views and voices are at the heart of all we do. My communities nurtured me growing up, and they taught me the values of fairness, equality, community. So it is with a heavy, broken heart that I will be voting against this bill today. As a matter of conscience, I need my constituents to know I cannot support the proposed changes to PIP as currently drafted on the face of the bill before us today.
As Tidball said there, the government wants to make it harder for people to claim personal independent payments. That's the benefit that people receive to help them buy disability aids or to pay for help whether they're in work or not. And if people ever come off PIP, the government also wants to make it more difficult for them to get back on it again. A Tidball speech comes in the context of Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall already granting some major concessions to the rebels. They include these. Current PIP claimants will keep their benefit. Stricter eligibility requirements will only apply to new claims from November 2026. A review of the PIP assessment process, having input from disabled people. Existing recipients of the health-related element of universal credit will have their incomes protected in real terms. Just before we went live, The Guardian reported that the government is set to offer even further concessions to head off an embarrassing rebellion. Starmer will apparently freeze the tighter eligibility requirements contained in the bill until after the completion of a review into the current criteria used to assess people. That review into the PIP system, led by the Disabilities Minister Stephen Timms, was due to report back in autumn 2026, meaning any new system will now be unlikely to come into effect until 2027 at the earliest. You have to ask, though, in what way does it benefit the government to try to change a system used by people living in such precarity before it's even completed its own review? This new concession will be deeply humiliating for Liz Kendall. Just a few hours ago, she was vigorously defending the new eligibility regime to journalists and claiming it would not be delayed. At the moment, up to 40 Labour MPs are still set to vote against the bill. Labour MP Rachel Maskell has been a leader of sorts amongst the rebels, and it's her amendment tabled today that could trigger the rebellion and stop the bill passing through Parliament. She said this in the House of Commons earlier today.
My constituent sat in front of me with his gorgeous little girl, thankfully with headphones on and playing a kiddie's game. He said he wouldn't get through this. He just about manages now. Some days he gets up, others not. As his mental health is failing, he can't work. Everything else has been taken from him. And now, this little bit of funding to help them get by, to give him just 1 ounce of dignity, was more than he could bear. Then the words came. It would be better that I wasn't here. That was also his expectation. He tried before. He'll be safe now, but the one who follows not. These Dickensian cuts belong to a different era and a different party. They are far from what this Labour Party is for, a party to protect the poor, as is my purpose, for I am my brother's keeper. These are my constituents, my neighbours, my community, my responsibility, and I cannot cross by on the other side. For one, let alone for the 150,000 who will be pushed further into poverty. And as so many of us fear, and as the evidence shows, since 600 people took their lives under the Tories' brutal reforms, the tragedy of this ideology could be worse. So I will fight for the purpose of politics, for their livelihoods and their lives. It is a matter of conscience, deep conscience for me, to ensure that these precious people are treated for once with dignity, so they matter for being and not just doing.
Powerful, powerful words. And my goodness, it's so rare to hear people speak with conviction and moral principle in politics these days, isn't it? Kieran, before I want to go to you, I just want to say, this is a really important detail. Not many people are aware of it. Liz Kendall shares a £4 million flat in London with her financier partner. £4 million, and her heating bill is paid for by the taxpayer, and she's trying to take money away from some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in this country. Her heating bill is paid by the taxpayer. She lives in a £4 million London property. Kieran, apparently this is just politics as usual. It's grown-up politics, having people that live in multi-million pound London penthouses taking money away from people who have basically nothing. Labour claim to be different to this. They claim to have a USP, which is basically, we're not the Tories, this is what they do. But now Labour's doing it. What kind of political overhead do you think that means for them in the medium to long term?
I think it's devastating for them politically, and so it should be, because it's utterly devastating to the lives of the people who are always invariably disproportionately saddled with any so-called economic bill that needs to be paid, either on the basis of the excuse that the deficit is too high or the debt or national debt's too high, as was the case with Osborne and Cameron and the Tories, or in this case with Labour, that they need to stick to fiscal rules and that there's no money to invest in things that we need to invest in unless we take it off the people who need it most and have the least. And so I think it will be very politically costly. We all remember, I mean, it's very, very recently that we lived through austerity. You don't have to have a very long memory. That never really ended for disabled people. There was a tremendous retrenchment of the state as far as provisions and support that disabled people could enjoy. And that led to massive, I don't want to use too abstract a term because it has very, very serious individual personal consequences, but massive structural violence against many, many hundreds of thousands of people, indeed millions of people in our country. And, you know, so that's the moral stuff, right? And you're right, Aaron, you don't often hear kind of morally charged speeches like that in Parliament anymore, very rarely. And it's brilliant that we did. So that's the moral stuff. But politically, we keep coming back to this on Novara, especially you and I, Aaron, but we're right to. You really have to assume that Keir Starmer doesn't have an ounce of not just political nous or strategic nous, but kind of he's one of the worst political operators imaginable, because everybody that briefs out against him, all of his own party members that brief out against him, cabinet or backbenchers say, we can't get the time of day with the guy. We can't get the time of day with the guy. We can't get time of day with his strategists. None of them will speak to us. None of them, they dismiss us in the most impertinent, imaginable way. And even if we're part of a left, broadly speaking, that thinks that kind of stuff is downstream from the really important stuff, and it's true, it is downstream from the really important stuff. The really important stuff being how we treat disabled people in this country and, you know, what kind of lives they lead because of the policies that are passed in Parliament. Of course, that's the critical stuff. But, you know, there is a kind of, there's a strong imperative to build behind the scenes and to create kind of consensus among your cabinet and among backbench MPs that's necessary if we want to see any kind of significant transformative change in this country, right? FDR did it. It's one of the great masters, one of the great examples. And I think it requires personal qualities that Keir Starmer apparently signally and completely lacks. And I'll just say one more thing. I've been geeking out on a podcast about 1974 in Britain, right? And one thing that's really struck me is that I would have been a socialist in 1974 as well, but taxes were at 80 and 90%. There really, really wasn't the superabundance of untapped wealth that there is right now in the world, and particularly in a few countries, ours being one of them. There really wasn't the kind of there were rich people and there were poor people. And of course, I like to think if I were in 1974, I would have been absolutely advocating to push the 80% or 90% tax rate even higher for the people with other income, as it was called, you know, wealth, estates, assets, etc. But you are struck when you listen to the kind of challenges that Harold Wilson, then Prime Minister, Ted Heath before him faced. You are struck with the view that actually there wasn't the superabundance of wealth, of untapped wealth that has accumulated over time since then, which exists now. And so morally, of course, but also politically, what the hell was Keir Starmer and his Labour government name only doing? Trying to so obvious, I mean, they must really estimate the collective intelligence of the country so dismally to think that they could have got away with, you know, cutting the winter fuel allowance, removing, you know, huge tranches of disability benefit, making it more and more difficult for the most vulnerable people and so on, and failing to go after the however many additional billionaires have been created, or however many additional billions have been added to their bank accounts, especially since COVID. It really is shocking, as I say, both morally and I think politically, it's kind of stunning.
Well, it can be explained by the fact that Keir Starmer and the people around him have one strategy in terms of trying to cultivate broader national popularity, and that's bash the left. They think the more we bash the left, the better our poll ratings will be. Oh, they're going down. They're going really down, actually. Some polls have them in the low 20s. Let's bash the left. Not working, guys. Maybe try something else. And I think you're right, Kieran. He doesn't have the personal qualities to build a wider coalition to govern effectively, whatever his agenda is, by the way. You have to be a people person, a good networker, build trust, build rapport. He can't do that. I mean, the guy is a very strange human being. So you can't do that on a personal level. He hasn't got the right sort of emotional, social skill set. But then on a political level, who do you think Labour voters are? You know, you can't just focus on these Labour Tory swing voters who do exist, by the way. You can't just focus on those guys. And then, you know what? The rest of your coalition, the other 90%, sling your hook, sod off. That is insane. It is insane. And that is a big reason why their polling is so bad. That is why right now Reform are heading for a majority. A party with 4 or 5 now MPs is heading for a majority. 5 MPs, that's not normal, Keir. And that's because of you. People say it's because of Farage, he's such an exceptional politician. He is, by the way. But that's not because of Farage. It's because of Labour. It's because you have people like Liz Kendall, who lives in a £4 million London penthouse with her heating bill being paid by the taxpayer, saying that people on disability benefit and getting PIP should get less. When you do that, guess what? The public don't like you. The public don't like you. Now they're leaning into policing. They're saying we're going to be very strong on law and order and justice. And by the way, it's not left coded. We're going to bash the left. We're going to stand up against antisocial behavior and come down on crime like a ton of bricks. Rachel Reeves, LinkedIn Rachel, bodged her numbers so badly in the first 12 months that they're going to have to cut police budgets in real terms. They're going to have to. They're going to have to. The Financial Times over the weekend said that our numbers in the budget right now are about 10 to 20 billion out. So you're going to see more cuts and you're going to see more tax rises. More cuts and more tax rises. They're kind of maxed out on the welfare cuts, right? So other departments are coming. Other departments are coming. They're going to have to cut policing budgets. We've chosen as a country to incarcerate more people and not build more prison places. So you're having early release of prisoners as well. That isn't Labour's fault. So you say we're going to lean into law and justice while cutting policing budgets and releasing convicts earlier. Is that a strategy? It sounds to me like you're clinically insane, Keir Starmer. But it's even worse. It's even worse. Because actually you don't have a plan. You don't have a clue when you think you're the smartest guy in the room. That's the worst place to be. The Green Party leadership race is creating quite a buzz on the left of British politics. And Novara Media has exclusively revealed that according to leaked data, Green Party membership has soared by at least 8% since Zach Polanski, currently the party's deputy leader, announced his leadership bid back in early May. Polanski is challenging current co-leader of the party, Adrian Ramsey, who's running alongside Green MP Ellie Chowns. If the data Novara has seen is accurate, and of course, we are pretty sure that it is, then Green Party membership is at its highest ever level at more than 65,000 people. The figure tops the previous peak of 63,000. That was in 2015, following outrage when then party leader Natalie Bennett was excluded from the televised leaders' debates. But it isn't just the left that seems to be benefiting from Keir Starmer's political meltdown over welfare cuts and the Tories' disappearance into complete and utter irrelevance. Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, was only founded in 2018. Back then, it was called the Brexit Party. Following a rebrand, the party fought the 2024 general election and delivered 5 MPs to Parliament. That, of course, included Farage himself in his 8th and first successful bid to become an MP. Since then, Reform has won control of 12 local councils and even gained 1 London Assembly member. Many opinion polls suggest bigger gains to come at future national and local elections for both the Greens and Reform, though as everyone knows, Reform's gains are huge right now. They are very, very significant. Winning 10 authorities like they did in May is unprecedented. Now, opinion polls predict the future, or at least they try to. But how are Reform actually doing right now? After all, they have a fair bit of power and authorities right across the country. What are they doing with it? Are they making a difference to everyday people? Well, in Warwickshire County Council, reform has the largest number of councillors, though it doesn't enjoy overall control. And there, two calamities have befallen them in the past week alone. First, their council leader stood down after a mere 41 days in power, leaving an 18-year-old, yes, an 18-year-old, in charge of a council with a £400 million annual budget. At the same time, a row has also broken out in the full glare of the national media. That concerns flying the pride flag from the council's headquarters. Displaying the pride flag is standard across most councils during Pride Month, but the council's reform leadership has ordered that it be removed. This is how Reform's Zia Yusuf, who's leading their version of Doge, put the issue.
A coup d'etat is underway in Britain. During the local elections earlier this year, Reform candidates promised that if you voted for them, the only flags permitted to be flown on council premises were the great flags of our nation, the St. George's flag, the Union flag, the flags of our armed forces and of our king. No more flags of foreign countries, no more flags to promote political activism. Reform won a walloping majority on May the 1st, becoming the largest party with 23 seats on the council. The council leader instructed the CEO of the council, the lead civil servant, to action the flag policy. The response he got was extraordinary. She said, quote, "I am afraid I will not be taking the action that you are requesting. The decisions around which flags to fly at Shire Hall have been left to me as the CEO. I had agreed with Councillor Howard that both the flag of St. George and the Pride flag would be flown, and in my view that arrangement continues. The Pride flag is due to come down after the coming weekend, at which point the Ukrainian flag will be lifted again. So there you are, the unelected bureaucrat dictating terms to the duly elected representative of you, the people. The council CEO defying a direct, lawful instruction from the elected official. While there are no tanks on the streets, this is a coup. Well, I have some news for the CEO of Warwickshire Council. You are not the monarch of Warwickshire, you are a public servant. The people voted for change, and your obstruction is nothing less than the subversion and sabotage of democracy.
You would think somebody's been shot, right? You'd think that this political assassination, the music, it's like Trump, grazing the ear. You think Zia Yusuf has just had his ear grazed, and of course I wish no ill harm to Zia Yusuf. It's very menacing, very scary. It's a flag for Pride Month, okay? Now, I understand people have a range of views on this stuff. They might just say, look, I don't really care about Ukraine or Pride Month. I just have the national flag there. I mean, I doubt that's most Novara viewers or listeners, but that's a lot of people out there. But it is important to say this is literally just for 1 month, right? And I think most people would agree, including Reform voters, that a very positive aspect of the last 25, 30 years is that we're far more inclusive as a society with LGBT people. We just are. And a big part of that is Pride. People going on Pride marches and just there being overt public displays of this stuff being okay. Diverse lifestyles are fine. It's good. We're better for it as a society without having to tell people to repress how they really feel. It's bad for them. It's bad for the rest of us. It's bad for everybody. People should just be happy. We all have a right to be happy. Well, Zia Yusuf isn't so sure. While all that pettiness plays out, Zach Polanski does seem to be energizing not only the left of the Green Party, but the wider left too. With friends of this show, Grace Blakely and James Medway, publicly stating that they've joined the party to vote for him. Polanski has already stated that Zoran Mamdani's remarkable success in the Democratic primary to become New York's next mayor has helped crystallize his strategy going forward. And Polanski's mantra to tax wealth, not work, anticipates a similar focus on what you might call bread and butter cost of living themes. Kieran, a recent polling has the Greens on about 10%, the Tories on 17%. Is the former a Zoran Mamdani's video guy away from overtaking the latter?
I'll talk about the Greens in 1 sec. I just want to quickly go back to Reform for a second. I think it's quite interesting. I remember several months back, talked about how Reform will fare when they taste any kind of power, local or national. And I think that this is an example of a collision of style and substance, actually, which is to say, Reform in both style and substance, I think, are best suited to opposition and to oppositional campaigning and to polemics, to critiquing And, we had a discussion about it a few months back, Aaron, and both of us said, well, we'll just have to wait and see. And, maybe they'll professionalize, as the term goes. I know it's a horrible term, but, maybe they'll get into power and they'll have some of that tact that we said Keir Starmer so signally lacks. And they'll have very skilled, clever people, operators who can kind of bridge that gap between politics and administration, or politics and bureaucracy. Again, sounds boring, but it is necessary, I think, for a party to kind of morph from a caterpillar into a butterfly, to go from being a kind of party of protest or, 5 MPs into being a credible governing party in any way. I think Nigel Farage is obviously a good embodiment of this. You say he's a very skilled politician earlier, and you're right, he is. He is a very skilled politician in lots of ways. I don't think I believe that he's the full article as far as a skilled politician goes. I think that Nigel Farage has lived his life perpetually in opposition and able to preside over polemic after polemic as a result of that. And he is incredibly, incredibly talented at doing just that. Of course, in my view, causing a great deal of damage to the country in the process. I don't think that I believe that Nigel Farage is going to have all of the skills to be in power, actually. I think that he will start to look like a significantly less good politician if, and we hope it doesn't, but if that were to happen. I worked in a local authority. I know how much of a pain in the backside chief executives can be. But this is actually, according to the letter of devolved powers and the letter of the law, the chief executive in Warwickshire is right. It is actually part of the corporate structure to decide what flags go on the building. Now, of course, behind the scenes, there's de facto, politicians leading on whatever. But actually, Zia Yusuf can say it's a coup d'etat. I mean, ridiculous rhetoric. The kind of thing you can only say in a country that sees very little actual state organized violence or whatever, get away with saying things like that. Absolutely pathetic. The reason that he might say all of that, coup d'etat, tanks on the streets, etc., but actually the law is quite clear. I mean, devolved powers are quite clear on that. Local Government Act is quite clear on that particular legislation. Just quickly on the Greens, because I don't want to just talk about reform. I think that Zach Polanski is interesting in what's been a bit of a wasteland for the electoral left. I said that once before on the show and you corrected me. You said, no, we've got interesting people outside, Gary Stevenson, you, Ash, many people around Novara. And in Novara, what I meant was in electoral politics, it's been, I think we would all agree, a bit of a wasteland since 2019, and we've all been trying to get our heads together and work out where to go with things. I think Zach Polanski certainly marks some kind of rupture with that. Now, whether that rupture will turn into a Zoran Mamdani scale revolution or juggernaut or whatever remains to be seen. I think everybody knows, I'm sure Zach Polanski would say himself, he's not Zoran Mamdani. Zoran Mamdani almost seems like he's AI generated or something by people on the left wanting the best possible candidate in America or in New York. But Zach Polanski is, I think, he's definitely more than a glimmer of hope. And I think he is interesting. And actually, credit to him, when he's on Andrew Marr or any of the Laura Kuenssberg, any of the shows he's on, and he's asked the ridiculous questions that those kinds of people ask people like Zach Polanski, he's very, very good. He stood very firm. He might be more timorous of nature and style than someone like Zoran Mamdani, but actually he's been very, very firm in the way that robust in the way that he's responded to them. And I think he's quite a skilled media operator. Again, he's not 10 out of 10. He's not Mamdani yet. Maybe he will be, but he's good. He's good. And not to just make it all about comms, finally. More important than the comms, and of course, this is the case with Mamdani, the comms come after the policies. And Mamdani obviously struck, such an important heap of gold by being so stringently close to cost of living, things that affect ordinary New Yorkers, what he was going to do for them, and really articulating it with a great deal of clarity and repeating his message over and over again about that. And I think if Zach Polanski can home in on the wealth not work and unpick that and sort of deconstruct it into a series of a few very, very salient policies, it could really cut through in the kind of proportions that reform have on the other side of the political spectrum. And I just want to also say, finally, sorry, it's right that we focus on economic factors in Zoran's success. It's also a win for it's further down the agenda or down the roster, but it's a win for Palestine because here you have an unapologetically pro-Palestine candidate. And so all of the times that I've sat on Novara Live and you've said, Aaron, and others have said, we need to keep trying to encourage that shift in public opinion toward a pro-Palestine position. All of that, I think, has finally translated at the ballot box in one of the most important cities, if not arguably the most important city in the world. So that should give us great encouragement, and it should give Zach Polanski courage on the front of Palestine, Israel as well.
Yeah, there's a few people in the comments saying, but Aaron, the chief executive, the CEO, by the way, these people are paid, telephone number salaries. They shouldn't be. Many of them earn more than the prime minister, which is just ludicrous, frankly. The CEO shouldn't be overriding the democratic will of the electorate. To be clear, in Warwickshire, that authority, Warwickshire County Council, there's 57 councillors, 22 of them are Reform. That's not a majority administration. Okay? And what they said ahead of the local elections was, in Reform-controlled authorities, we will do this carry on with flags. By the way, I'm not a big fan of flags either. I don't really care. Right? I don't really care. Israel flag, Pride flag, Palestine. I don't really. So I'm pro-Palestine. I want the RAF to stop flying from Cyprus and giving reconnaissance to the IDF. A flag on City Hall, I don't care. It doesn't really do very much. I don't really care. I see the point of Pride flags during Pride Month, but it's not something that's just core to my politics. But in terms of the democratic side to this stuff, Reform literally don't have a majority in that authority. They don't have a majority. They're a minority administration. And as I said, they have a new leader, a new group leader, and therefore a new leader of the council, who's interim. So what authority does the interim leader of a minority administration have to do pretty much anything? Does he have buy-in from the various other parties? You've got the Greens in Warwickshire County Council saying that, they want to run it like a dictatorship. If they had a thumping majority of 2/3 of the seats like they do in Durham, I think you're on slightly stronger ground. That's not the case here. And actually, if you listen to what Zia Yusuf says in that video, I should have said it actually when we came straight out of it. He said, they're defying the will of the people. They have a majority. They don't have a majority. It's a lie. It's a lie. We're going to see this a lot more, by the way. We're going to see this a lot more. It's not just Trump, folks. We're going to see this a lot more. When they're in coalition with this or that person, they'll say, we're in charge. When somebody else is in coalition, they'll say they're in charge. There's not going to be that much commitment to the facts and to the details. Just my 2 pops worth. Let's go to your comments. We do actually have, before we go any further, big news from The Guardian. Number 10, Guts welfare bill in big new concessions as Minister says PIP cuts plan for 2026 shelved until after the Timms review. That's what we briefed at the top of that story, basically pushing it back a year. Stephen Timms, the Social Security and Disability Minister, said this in Parliament. I can announce that we're going to remove the clause 5 from the bill at committee, that we will move straight to the wide review, sometimes referred to as the Timms review, and only make changes to PIP eligibility, activities and descriptors following that review. Big win. Big win for people who claim PIP, or will be claiming PIP in the future, really. The government is committed to concluding the review by the autumn of next year. So, yeah, it will come into force in 2027. It's another big concession. It means there is a chance that new PIP eligibility rules will not come into force in November 2026, which is the plan. Much more importantly, it means that the switch to a 4-point PIP eligibility rule may never happen at all. It won't be in the legislation. The 4-point rule was, of course, the key instrument that was going to deliver that £2.5 billion savings that the Treasury was going to deliver. This is another clusterfuck, folks. It's just like the winter fuel allowance all over again. Burn a ton of political capital, alienate a ton of people, all in the name of generating revenues for the Treasury because, you've bodged your numbers, LinkedIn Rachel. You lose the political capital, you alienate people, your polling numbers go down, you have an internal rebellion, and guess what? You haven't actually raised that much money at all. And just to repeat, the Financial Times over the weekend think that the government is now as much as £20 billion out with regards to their sums. So there's going to be more tax rises in the autumn budget and more cuts to public services. Clearly, they cannot get cuts through when it comes to welfare. They can't. It's just not politically tenable for the government to do that. We've found that now on 2 occasions, both the Winter Fuel Allowance and now with PIP. The cuts will have to come from somewhere else. Probably local government, probably policing. Not going to come from defence, right? Remember, Keir Starmer has committed the UK to spending 5% of GDP on defence and national resilience by 2035. 5%! Defence spending will be 3.5%. Right now, it's 2.3%. So we're looking at additional, just on defence spending, not the national resilience bit, we're looking at an additional £25 billion on defence. So it's not going to come from defence spending. That's got to go up, right? And already before we spent more on defence, our numbers are already out. What a disaster. They could not have had a more chaotic, disastrous first 12 months. Quite extraordinary. Israel has bombed a cafe in Gaza City. The Al-Baqqa cafe was crowded with civilians when the airstrike took place, killing 39 people. It was one of the few remaining spots in the enclave where people were able to access the internet or charge their phones. Dozens were killed in the blast. Amongst those was photojournalist and filmmaker Ismail Abu Hattab, whose reporting on the genocide has been used by Western outlets like the BBC and Deutsche Welle. A journalist, Bayan Abu Sultan, who has used her account Bayan Palestine to give the world an insight into the dreadful conditions in Gaza, was also injured in the attack. Her condition is currently unknown. The Israeli military has now killed over 220 Palestinian journalists and media workers in Gaza. And to give you a sense of conditions in Gaza for those still alive, late last year, my colleague Stephen Methven was in touch with Bayan to ask if she'd participate in a project. She said no, fearing for her and her family's lives if she drew any more Israeli attention to herself. Also killed was renowned artist Franz Al-Salmi, whose work has been internationally exhibited. A 60-year-old Abu al-Nur had just left the cafe when the bomb hit. He told The Guardian this. Just as I was close, a missile struck. Shrapnel flew everywhere, and the place filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. I couldn't see anything. I ran toward the cafe and found it destroyed. I went inside and saw bodies lying on the ground. All the cafe workers were killed. There was a family there with their young children. Why were they targeted? It was a place where people came to find some relief from the pressures of life. The cafe had survived 20 months of Israel's assault on Gaza. Another eyewitness said this. Forget red lines. We're past that. Nothing left to say. Looked around, all I see is blood. Men, martyrs, limbs. Unbelievable. People come here to take a break from what they see inside Gaza. They come westward to breathe. As we've said repeatedly, there is no safe place in Gaza. Now, there is nowhere to breathe either. Footage of the aftermath of the strike shows the damage to both the cafe and to human bodies, with the ground littered in shrapnel, broken furniture, and pools of blood. Amongst the scenes described by the witnesses, a dead 4-year-old child, an elderly man with both legs blown off. Nearly 57,000 Palestinians have now been killed by Israel in Gaza, and almost the entirety of the enclave's 2.3 million inhabitants have been displaced, forced to find a way to survive amongst the territory now reduced to rubble. Kieran, what did you make of this story? Quite extraordinary, because this is and I mean that. I mean, that's a word you not really associate with the story in Gaza. Extraordinary. It's all extraordinary. What's new? This was a space that was overwhelmingly used as a resource and a hub by journalists, by prominent members of Palestinian civil society, to tell the world what was going on. It was a cafe with internet access. It was hit by a missile. What do you make of it?
I just don't know what to say anymore about Gaza. I really don't. There's a lot to be said for what can happen outside of Gaza in our own country. And we'll come on to that after. I think we're going to talk about that in a minute. But when it comes to what's going on inside Gaza, it's so important that we continue to cover it and to give daily, or if not daily, near daily updates. And yet, somebody who prides himself on being able to find original things to say about things, successfully or not, I am out of ideas, Aaron. I really am. And it's just horror show after horror show. And you're right, this is a bit different because it's a specific place of refuge or respite that journalists who are covering the genocide go to. But what can you say about that, except that Israel has shown us that it has absolutely no conscience. It has no conscience whatsoever to speak of. Where its conscience should be, there is the abyss. And that's it. That's really all I can think to say. We know what we're dealing with here, or at least nobody can say that they weren't warned over and over and over again. I've said before on the show, if we don't intervene, or if this isn't stopped through some combination of methods and mechanisms, this is going down to the last drop of Palestinian blood. And I don't say that to be some kind of apocalyptic doom prophet, mad monk or something. I say it because empirically, that seems to me to be A, the design, and B, the reality, where it's heading. So I feel as devastated as every other person with a glimmer of conscience watching that. I am almost out of ideas as to how to mine the English language, to find language sufficient to describe the cruelty that has been leveled at the Palestinian people by Zionism and by an expression of that Zionism, the IDF and the Israeli state.
I think we need to start talking about the A word, which is appeasement. Our governments need to stop appeasing Israel. When you do A-level history about the Second World War, you learn about Italy in the 30s going into Ethiopia. You learn about the Japanese going into Manchuria. The League of Nations do nothing, and that basically gives the green light to the Second World War. Basically, gives the green light to the Axis powers, particularly the Third Reich, to engage in expansionism. Oh, we can just do this, turns out. This is very similar. What Israel is doing in Gaza, and of course this didn't start a couple of years ago, but what it's doing since October the 7th, 2023, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide, pushing these people out fundamentally of the Strip. This is a test case for the geopolitics of the 21st century. If they get away with this, with the blessing, and it is a blessing, overt or tacit, and it is a blessing, I think it's being tacitly blessed by the Western powers. If they get away with it, then these are the new rules of international relations. You can just kill people. You can just blow off the legs of 65-year-old men. You can just mutilate and murder whole families. Very similar to what was going on with the Japanese and the Italians, like I say, in their colonial exploits of the 1930s. Because that wasn't stamped down on, because it was appeased, we've got something far worse. And I suspect we'll see the same in the decades to come, unless the international community stands up and stops appeasing Israel. Now, I just want to bring you up this tweet from the UK's chief rabbi, Ephraim Mervis. It touches on the next story. Very important. This is from Sir Ephraim Mervis. My apologies. This is a time of national shame. He's not talking about Israel. The airing of vile Jew hatred at Glastonbury and the BBC's belated and mishandled response brings confidence in our national broadcaster's ability to treat anti-Semitism seriously to a new low. I mean, what the hell is going on? It should trouble all decent people, it doesn't trouble me, that now one need only couch their outright incitements of violence and hatred as edgy political commentary for ordinary people to not only fail to see it for what it is, but also to cheer it, chant it, and celebrate it. Toxic Jew hatred is a threat to our entire society. It is a national shame. It's a national shame for Israel that it's killed tens of thousands of kids in all likelihood. That's a national shame. I don't care about hurty words. I literally couldn't care less what any of my compatriots in this country, 68 million people in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, I couldn't care less what any of them say about a foreign army. I couldn't care. Don't care. I'm half Iranian. You want to slag off the Iranian army? Go ahead. You want to slag off the French army, Indian army, Pakistani army, Indonesian army, Dutch army, Russian army? The BBC do that every day. Go ahead. I literally don't care. But somehow I'm meant to think that the IDF is representative of Jewish people around the world, including in this country. Which, by the way, if I say that, it's anti-Semitic. If I say that the IDF is an expression of Jews around the world, including this country, I would be called anti-Semitic because I'm conflating Israel and its armed forces with Jews. Which, by the way, I can see the argument there. So Ephraim Mervis can do it to shame people and to prohibit their free speech and free expression. But if I say the same thing, or if you say the same thing, it's anti-Semitism. By the way, if Jewish people say it when they're critical of Israel, they're also anti-Semites. See how it works? If you want to support our work, go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. We could not exist without our fantastic supporters. You know, last month we got 10 million views on this channel. 10 million views. We are giving legacy media a good run for their money. And it would not be happening without our readers, our listeners, our viewers. But more important than all of them, I'm afraid, is our army of supporters, all 14,100 of you. If you want to join them, help our work, build a new media for different politics, you know what to do. Go to, like I say, novaramedia.com/support. Punk duo Bob Vylan have faced what, by any measure, might be the most hysterical backlash to a Glastonbury performance in British history. And that's really saying something. The issue? Well, among other things, the band called out the words death, death, death to the IDF, a chant that was picked up by the crowd and also broadcast live by the BBC. Pro-Zionist commentators and politicians have been quick to condemn those words as anti-Semitic. But today on Channel 4 News, Novara's Ash Sarkar cut straight through the pearl clutching. She appeared with the director of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young, who made this argument.
What he chanted and what he said, it was borderline, if not straightforwardly, anti-Semitic. And I think it's just generally true that expressions of anti-Semitism, certainly anti-Zionism, are not considered as egregious as other forms of racism. And I do think that had he said something about another ethnic group, let's not forget, Ash, that the majority of the population of Israel are in the IDF, including teenagers. So when you're chanting death, death to the IDF, you're essentially calling for the genocide of Jews living in Israel. So it's quite hard to defend it, I think, I mean, I don't think he should be prosecuted, to be clear, but nevertheless, I think it was pretty unsavory. And had it been another ethnic group he was attacking, I think the BBC would have pulled the plug.
This was Ash's response to that argument.
I completely disagree with you, Toby, which is a shame because I find you normally to be a very, very rigorous thinker. The IDF is an organisation. It is an institution. It is an army which is currently carrying out absolutely egregious war crimes and massacres. So egregious that even Wes Streeting, who is, generally very supportive of Israel, said, get your house in order. And I think it's possible to object and to find distasteful what Bob Vylan or anyone else said. That's entirely your right, without changing substantively what was said. Not talking about an ethnic group, talking about an army, a military currently engaged in an absolutely brutal war. The second thing, and this is important for coming back to the points made by Bob Vylan and also by NECAP, which is part of the reason why Bob Vylan and also NECAP feel so strongly a sense of solidarity to Palestine, is that they relate it to their own experience of colonialism and racism. Obviously, Bob Vylan, this punk duo, both of them are black. NECAP, they say we consider the north of Ireland to be an occupied territory. And they make the connections between the history of, say, the black and tans who were operating in Ireland, enacting horrific violence, and the same individuals were involved in, 1930s and 1940s, what was then the mandate of British Palestine. So all of these things, they have answers for. They have a set of politics around, and it's not about singling out Jews. They've put it in their own words about what it's about. And I think that there is something so pernicious and underhand about when someone's telling you what their politics are and saying, this is why I believe what I believe. Instead, you're saying, no, I can see into your heart, I can read your mind, and this is what I think is really going on, because it's completely unfalsifiable.
What other military would we be having this conversation about? I'm being serious. What other military would Channel 4 invite people on? People condemning, as we'll see in a moment, this country's national broadcaster. What are that? You condemned the French Foreign Legion. That was bigoted against French people. If you said that, people would laugh at you. They'd say, what the hell are you talking about? This guy's a nut job. We said about Israel. If you want to say the IRGC, they're horrific. I'm half Iranian. Say what you like. I don't care. I literally don't care. I don't want you to be arguing to bomb Tehran. My family lived there. I don't want a civil war in Tehran. I don't want the West to create another Yugoslavia in West Asia. But if you want to say some hurty words about the Iranian military, go ahead. Go ahead. But with the RDF, it's different. And now we should point out that Toby Young was actually consistent in his position regarding that debate. He concluded that Bob Vylan shouldn't be prosecuted for their speech unless it could be shown that the IDF was a racial or ethnic group. Of course, it can't be. It's largely made up of Jewish Israelis, but not all members are Jewish, nor are all Jewish Israelis members. Plenty of them refuse to serve. But other free speech warriors have exercised less nuanced thinking, as supporting the idea that the band should be prosecuted, and even applauding the US, a country with constitutionally protected free speech rights, withdrawing the duo's visa. Reform leader Nigel Farage posted this online today. I heard you want your visa back, at Bobby Vylan. What next, Nigel? Will you be calling for them to be debanked? How ironic. Also on the hypocrite step is the Telegraph newspaper. Its published articles arguing that youngsters chanting for death shows how sick Britain now is. Danny Cohen saying the BBC's broadcast of Glastonbury hate chanting is nothing short of criminal. This isn't just for Ofcom anymore. It's time for the police. By the way, Cohen used to be the director of BBC Television. Now he wants his old employer investigated by the police. My old line manager, bang them up. Why? Because they broadcast somebody being critical of a foreign army. Perhaps, though, the Telegraph should have checked its own archives first. In 2015, they published this article with a headline calling for the death of the Labour Party, posted over a photo of then Labour leader Ed Miliband. The great irony is that in that piece, under that headline, the author clarifies that what he's calling for is for the Labour Party to be wound up. Well, just calm down. I don't want anybody to really die, which is exactly what Bob Vylan were calling for in respect to the IDF. Of course, this whole row has only served the IDF, helping to keep eyes off their genocide in Gaza. This was journalist Rachel Shabby, who is a British Jew, it should be said, on LBC.
What disturbs me the most is the media bandwidth given to this subject. Just this weekend, we've had some of the deadliest bombardments on Gaza by Israel, carpet bombing Gaza. Schools where people are sheltering were bombed. A cafe where people were seeking shelter from the heat was bombed. On Friday, Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, had a report where Israeli soldiers said, actually, yes, we are shooting to kill civilians who are starving and looking for aid and going to aid centres in Gaza, killing field. There's no enemy, no threat, we're just killing them. That's an Israeli soldier saying that. In a weekend where we've had these two things on top of a 20-month-long war described as genocide by genocide experts, it is absolutely shameful and a disgrace that the media is focusing on this and not having the headlines running day after day on the atrocities that are being committed in Gaza and the dystopian nightmare that Palestinians in Gaza are experiencing every day now for the past 20 months. Where for 20 solid months, day after day after day, we have been watching the most grotesque things it is possible to watch human beings experience in Gaza. The slaughter, the massacre, the war crimes, the largest cohort of child amputees created in Gaza. And people are watching governments and media, including our government, obfuscate, support, give financial and military support and diplomatic cover to Israel while it does this. Of course, people are losing their minds over it. And of course, I respect any artist who uses their platform to call attention to this grotesque atrocity that's happening in real time every day.
Can you imagine, like I say, let's rewind this to the 1930s, right? Italian soldiers in Ethiopia killing civilians. Can you imagine if there was some sort of outcry by an artistic, a creator, musicians, let's say, could be anybody, right? And they say, we're gonna boycott pizzerias. We are at our wits' end with regards to ultranationalist political figures in Italy, and we think the Italian army are scumbags. Can you imagine people? That's bigotry against Italians. That's the play we're seeing right now with regards to the IDF from the Zionist lobby. Bob Vylan have been responding to the backlash generated by their performance at Glastonbury this weekend. And to say they're unrepentant would be putting it mildly. They posted this response on Instagram. Today, a good many people would have you believe a punk band is the #1 threat to world peace. True. This is how it's being basically presented, right? Last week, it was a Palestine pressure group. The week before, it was another band. We are not for the death of Jews, Arabs, or any other race or group of people. We're for the dismantling of a violent military machine. A machine whose own soldiers were told to use, quote, unnecessary lethal force against innocent civilians waiting for aid. A machine that has destroyed much of Gaza. We, like those in the spotlight before us, are not the story. We're a distraction from the story. And whatever sanctions we receive will be a distraction. The government doesn't want us to ask why they remain silent in the face of this atrocity, to ask why they aren't doing more to stop the killing, to feed the starving. The more time they talk about Bob Vylan, the less time they spend answering for their criminal inaction. We're being targeted for speaking up. We're not the first. We will not be the last. And if you care for the sanctity of human life and freedom of speech, we urge you to speak up to Free Palestine. It's no coincidence, is it? It's no coincidence that our stories today have been Missile Hits Cafe in Gaza, which is a hub for media workers and journalists inside Gaza to tell the world about a genocide. That's happened. A witness says that a child was killed, an old man lost his legs, family was killed. That's happened. And we're also talking about what somebody said at Glastonbury. And the media wants to focus on the second one, not the first one. It's not a coincidence, is it, Kieran?
It's certainly not. And I said before that we're running out of, or I felt as though I was fearful that I was running out of vocabulary to describe the horror inside of Gaza. Not that anybody has language equal to that anyway. But there is much to say. I didn't mean that as a counsel of despair. Actually, it sharpens what I'm about to say, I think, and that there is so much for us to do outside of Gaza, impenetrable though the Israelis have made it. And it's amazing to me and incredibly disturbing that, to echo what Rachel Shabby said, here we are 21 months into a genocide that has been live streamed in 4K into our homes and through our phones and so on. But it's only now, with the threat of proscription of Palestine Action and the attacks by the state on Bob Vylan and Kneecap and so on, that we at Novara Media, that I and colleagues have to start thinking seriously and carefully about the language we employ in future, lest we find ourselves arrested. It's astonishing to me that that is what incurs the wrath of the state in this country, to the extent that now we have to consider very carefully how we think about and report things. That's the first thing. I can't be bothered to insult anybody's intelligence, any Novara Media listener or viewer's intelligence, to explain why any claim that this, Toby Young's or otherwise, that this is synonymous, what Bob Vylan said is synonymous with anti-Semitism. I think it would be a waste of our time and energy. I just want to actually read something quickly. Quote, if the situation were reversed, we would be mobilizing, quite rightly mobilizing, the British armed forces as part of an international protection force. Whose words? A Tory MPs. A Tory MPs in Parliament 3 weeks ago speaking about the war crimes and genocide committed by the Israelis. Was he inciting violence on the IDF by raising the spectre of the need to deploy the British armed forces? Because when you deploy the armed forces, guess what? They fight and they kill. That's what they do. You can say protection or peacekeeping. In reality, they fight and they kill. So for Kit Malthouse, a Tory MP who has previously held cabinet positions, to be saying something like that. And of course, people critiqued it, and the usual suspects, the Jake Wallace-Simons of the world, said that people like him said that he was being anti-Semitic and so on. But the difference in treatment with Kit Malthouse and Bob Vylan is, I think, very, very instructive. Nobody picked it up in the same terms. Nobody seemed to care about it. And why? I think it's because Kit Malthouse was, first of all, he's white. Second of all, he's a Tory politician. Third of all, he was saying it in the Houses of Parliament. When Bob Vylan said that at Glastonbury, the thing that I think really, really scared the living shit out of Jake Wallace-Simons, all of the other paid-up, card-carrying propagandists for genocide, as their stooges in the political and media class, the thing that really shat them up and scared them was that 5,000 people chanted it back, right? The IDF is not a protected characteristic. The IDF is an army committing a genocide. It's not a person. It's not a group. It's an army, by the way, composed of the compost of paramilitaries that committed ethnic cleansing in 1948 and destroyed British soldiers and diplomats at the time. Then, the point I really want to make is, and it's kind of in reference, I guess it bounces off the point I made about 5, 10, 15,000 people chanting back what Bob Vylan said. This doesn't end well for the British state. This really does not end well for the British state. If they keep banning things like this country is going to become ungovernable. And I don't want it to become ungovernable necessarily. I think there are important things that governments can do to protect people in society. I don't want this country to become ungovernable. What I want is the British political class to stop its catastrophic support, catastrophic for itself in the long run, but obviously catastrophic first and foremost for Palestinians, stop its catastrophic support of Israeli genocide and war crimes. Instead, what it's doing is obviously it's doubling, it's tripling, it's quadrupling down. And it's doing that for a foreign government. For God's sake, it's doing all of this for a foreign state and a foreign government engaged in genocide. Do they honestly think, does Keir Starmer honestly think that if Britain were isolated on the world stage or in any kind of turmoil with its European neighbours or domestically, that Israel would send a single shekel or expend a drop of political capital to protect Keir Starmer, to protect Britain? Of course it wouldn't. The last time, as I mentioned earlier, Britain and Israel were in direct conflict. Israel was murdering British soldiers and booby-trapping their bodies so that the impact would be as maximal as possible. For God's sake. So I guess the only thing left for me to say is to the British establishment, I don't know how many of them are watching this or will watch this, but wake up, for God's sake. The Israelis don't do relationships. They do strategic alliances. And as soon as those strategic alliances stop being strategic, they will throw you to the most rabid pack of wolves imaginable.
I think that's right. I mean, look what they just did to Reza Pahlavi in Iran, right? Reza Pahlavi was an instrument of Israel trying to seek regime change in Tehran. Didn't work, and they just discredited the guy. Sorry, you worked for decades to go back in and affect regime change, maybe even be the monarch again. Sorry, we screwed it up because, actually the Knesset was going to dissolve itself and Netanyahu might be out of power. So, you know what? We'll just use you. We'll get you in. We'll bomb a few places in Tehran and Karaj and Fordow and Natanz. And okay, your whole thing, that's dead now. But, it meant that Netanyahu's polling got better for a few days. The exact same thing would happen to Starmer. And by the way, Nigel Farage, right? This is very much the scorpion on the frog's back. It doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about you. And by the way, just on that final point, Kieran, before we go, if Britain was doing what Israel is doing in Gaza, the British media would be more critical of Britain. Really? Can you imagine? Well, this looks pretty bad. You couldn't do it. You couldn't get away with it. But Israel's doing it, and we're getting non-stop news stories about an act at Glastonbury. You have to laugh almost. I mean, it's not funny because people are dying. It's life and death, but you either laugh or cry, right? Let's go to a super chat. Otacon with $4.99 in a super chat. Picasso painted Guernica. Was his painting a crime as well? Well, of course, that was anti-Spanish hate. That was anti-German hate. And hashtag stop German hate. Stop Franco hate. He's just a guy. He loves his country. He loves the church. He just believes in family values. Stop the hate. Kieran, thanks for joining me on tonight's show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Just on what you said about a better presenter, you're not going anywhere, Bastani. We've survived the hour in this interminable heat. So thanks for having me.
Well, if we don't get a better presenter, we'll certainly get better aircon for Kieran. Thanks to all of you watching tonight. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.